Joining us now, Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security for Virginia, Brian Moran. Mr. Secretary, good to have you with us.
Good morning, John. Happy 4th. I hope your holiday was satisfactory and pleasant.
It was fantastic. And don't you love the word holiday?
It's nice.
It's a better word. I like it. I was on holiday. Now, let's get to while I was on holiday.
They used that across the pond.
I know. That's the English thing, right? I picked it up while I was covering Brexit. So I had a couple people on, and they were telling me that after it was over, they were going on holiday. And I'm like, well, what holiday is that? And they're like, well, that's like my time off. So I kind of coined the phrase, I'll steal anything, Brian.
Well, you're probably like me, though. I don't know if we ever go on holiday anymore. It's kind of workations now. Now that we have these electronic devices,
yep.
We may be at a nice location, but we're still glued to our iPhones for the latest updates. So, particularly in Homeland Security and public safety. But I don't mind that. I that's part of the job.
Mr. Secretary, let's get to that. We had a tough couple days here. What happened in the Istanbul airport, and then the other day, another suicide bombing. Yeah. I mean, people that want to strap explosives to themselves and blow themselves up, how do you stop this?
Yeah, well, I do think that the bottom line, if you have an individual who is intent on committing suicide and taking as many, innocent citizens with them, they can, it's almost impossible to prevent. But I will tell you, I was at a Homeland Security conference last week,
right,
where 1,300 people, big crowd, national audience. I was there to make 2 presentations about Virginia, which we were very proud to do. But in terms of, the Homeland Security, we heard from the chief of San Bernardino, California, and he walked us through that incident out there with that mass shooting, the husband and wife team. And then we heard from the Paris commissioner and walked us through the bombings in Paris. It was fascinating. I mean, true terror. I mean, the fear, the fact that, you in San Bernardino, you had a Christmas party going on, county employees. I mean, that could happen to anyone. Mm-hmm. And for that to occur. And then in Paris, we had multiple attacks, individuals who strapped bombs on. So it was quite horrifying, but, something you have to go through. They walked us through what they did right, and lots of conversation about it afterwards. And, for instance, one quick one about the stadium. If you recall, in Paris, there was a soccer game going on where the French president was in attendance, and there was a bomb detonated just outside the stadium. They chose not to evacuate at that time because they worried about the injuries from evacuation, and they wanted to tactically figure out what was the motivations and what could occur if you were to evacuate. Because as it turns out, one of the bombers was waiting for the evacuation. At least they believe he was. And since they didn't evacuate immediately, he ended up detonating himself near a McDonald's restaurant, but there weren't as many individuals around, and so he didn't have maximum injuries or deaths. So just some of those tactical decisions that were made, it was really important for them to share with this crowd of first responders and law enforcement officers. And so it was fascinating. And, again, you have a lot of dedicated individuals in law enforcement trying to do their thing. And individuals need to, I continue to say, see something, say something. Individuals need to take responsibility and share with law enforcement things that are suspicious. So, yeah, lots going on in that world, John, unfortunately.
I tell you what, it's a frightening situation. What did you think about the comments of FBI Director, I think last week, FBI Director Comey saying, this is a indication of what is very possible could happen in the United States?
Well, we've seen, the bombings, fortunately, we had the Boston bombers. Those were IEDs. They wreaked havoc on those who were close by. They certainly could have been more explosive, I assume, if they if they knew more about how to do it. But they attempted to, and then San Bernardino was horrible, and then recently the Pulse nightclub. So we are dealing with it in the United States. The Pulse nightclub was just another horrible situation. Again, if you have someone intent on committing suicide and just taking, making as many casualties, taking them as many casualties with them, it's next to impossible. But there's a whole lot of good people trying to do what they can to prevent and mitigate such instances, and that's what this training's about. I'll tell you, in Virginia, we do mass shooting training for law enforcement and individuals, even for mass shooting to train hospitals with public health. We work with mass casualties. That was something they dealt with down in Orlando. That hospital was able to take in those injured, and it's remarkable that there were so many people who were in critical condition coming out of the hospital because there was such good medical attention to them. So there is a tremendous amount of training going on in Virginia, and we're obviously we're proud of that. We are doing everything we can to in that sort of situation. We've learned a lot since the days of Virginia Tech, where we were the worst mass shooting in the country until Orlando. So it certainly has struck Virginia.
Secretary Moran, we have many international students in Virginia, as you know. What are you doing, or what is your department doing with regards to keeping what could be potential sleepers at bay? And do you have any way to handle see something, say something, if it's a school or a professor? Would that get reported to an agency?
Oh, yes, it would. We constantly have contact with Department of Homeland Security and our Fusion Center, which is within the Department of Emergency Management, Virginia State Police. They distribute information. There are fusion centers were created after 9/11. Mm-hmm. So that information sharing would occur not only from the top down, but from the bottom up. And so you have the see something, say something funnels through, and then it can get to the appropriate personnel. So we take all of those things all of those sorts of claims very seriously. If there is such suspicion that information should and does get shared, and with appropriate authority. So Department of Homeland Security, FBI, and of course our own Virginia State Police, and through the Fusion Center, and then local law enforcement. And that's the information sharing that is critical to these types of things. That's why you have, when you look back, the information about, the Pulse nightclub shooter, the information about what happened out in San Bernardino. They do keep such information, and that's why it's important to have well-trained individuals doing that and give them the ability to perform that type of surveillance. And again, individuals who see something, say something, critically important.
So, Mr. Secretary, when you were at your conference last week, 1,300 people at it, obviously your colleagues, your peers in other states, how do you think Virginia stacks up in regard to safety as it relates to one of these attacks?
I think we're in a very, very good position, excellent position, John. And that obviously, from from my vantage point, I want us to be in a great spot. And the governor gives us the tools and the resources. Mm-hmm. In the last budget, he worked with the legislature. We funded 4 additional cybersecurity analysts because cybersecurity is an emerging threat. An emergency threat, not just stealing intellectual property, but it could be used as a method of an attack. You could attack your utilities, shut down your lights, shut down a dam. There's all sorts of scenarios that could be very dangerous. So we funded 4 additional cyber analysts at our Fusion Center. And so we're working with our legislature, and Governor McAuliffe puts this at very high very high priority. And the safety and security of the citizens of Virginia is his highest priority. So I think we're in an excellent spot. In fact, he is the new president or chairman of the National Governors Association this year. And he has declared, as is tradition, you pick a subject to work on for the year, and he has picked cybersecurity. So I think that's, it's something we can work on in a very bipartisan way. There really isn't any partisan notions about that. So I think it's brilliant to pick cybersecurity. I think you're going to see a lot of work done on it, and it also creates a lot of economic development because there's a lot of industry being created around cybersecurity. And in addition to workforce development, our colleges and universities need to produce more engineers and more cyber analysts. So I think that's a great issue to choose, and look forward to working with the governor and our Secretary of Technology on that issue. I will tell you also about why we are so well prepared, and it's been done over years, because Virginia occupies a very important place in our country, and it has in its boundaries some very important facilities. Mm-hmm. If you think about our military, Norfolk, the largest naval base in the country, and in the world for that matter, Pentagon, also intelligence, CIA, all the intelligence organizations, Langley. So, Virginia occupies an extremely important place among our other states when it comes to national security. So Virginia has to be well prepared. And so we work with our federal partners, we work with all our local partners to be as prepared as one can be under this type of, threat environment.
Mr. Secretary, looking at some of these other attacks, there's been some criticism of the imams in various mosques that knew these attackers and didn't say anything. Now, that's alleged, okay? We don't have definitive proof of that. But are there any plans in Virginia to monitor mosques where there might be activity that is not getting back to security?
Well, we've had a tremendous amount of dialogue and positive relationships with our mosques. I think it's critically important for us to have that deep relationship with them, and that information would be shared if it existed. We have one here in Chesterfield, the Islamic Center of Virginia, the Dulles Adams Center up in Northern Virginia. Been to both. The governor's been to both. That relationship has to be fostered and should be fostered too, so that information would be shared. And we have not in Virginia, to my knowledge, seen the lack of it. I think the relationships are strong and need to continue to be so. There would be that level of trust that information would be shared.
And are you comfortable that those refugees from Syria that are coming into Virginia that are being located here do you have access to the vetting process for that?
Access to the vetting process, no. This was a big issue a few months ago, and it continues to be something we are monitoring. Virginia Fusion Center, we'll put our Virginia Fusion Center together with the Department of Social Services, who has information about the refugees. And I think that's been a very positive development through this, that we've shared that sort of information so that we know where the refugees are being located and who they are once they come into the United States. The vetting process is done by the federal authorities. Obviously, we don't have access to that type of international information, and they do it. And they've provided us assurances that they're doing everything they can to vet these individuals, and that's the current situation.
Based on your knowledge, do you feel the vetting process is such that when these refugees come in that you're able to sleep at night?
Well, there's a lot of things that keep me up at night, John. We worry about hurricanes. We worry about any number of things. But in terms of the refugees specifically, they have assured us that they are performing all available processes to determine that these individuals are indeed refugees and are merely looking for a safe place to live and raise their families. Most of the refugees we have accepted are indeed families, young and old, and so that information is being shared, which again, that's a positive development, and so we'll continue to monitor it. And to date, there have been no incidents.
All right. We are out of time. We want to thank Secretary of Homeland Security and Public Safety for Virginia, Brian Moran, for being with us and doing such an excellent job. Good to have you on, Mr. Secretary, as always. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on, John.